San Diego Seals fans, fans around the world, lacrosse fans, sports fans, welcome back to the TFL Podcast. I got a really super cool special edition podcast, leadership group of the San Diego Seals, and a bunch of people that everybody will recognize with a really cool conversation about The Last Dance. Michael Jordan was iconic and is iconic in the world of sports and affected probably all of the players that are sitting with us today, crafted their formative years as they started to figure out who sports and what athletes were, except for maybe some of the Canadian guys that, well, you're all Canadian, and we don't have Wayne Gretzky, so we'll talk about Michael Jordan. But at the end of the day, we're going to talk about The Last Dance, and that just ended episode 10 last Sunday. But I want to introduce everybody. Here with us is our general manager and head coach, Patrick Merrill. How are you? Brodie Merrill, captain of the Seals. And Zack Greer, who joins us from his illustrious home in Dallas, Texas, thus the Star. And Kyle Buchanan, who's wearing a San Diego Padres hat appropriately, but not in San Diego right now. And then from his wonderful perch atop Little Italy, we have our friend Cam Holding. So welcome to the show, boys.
How's it going, TFL?
I thought for this conversation it was important to have a referee. So I'm going to invite in our good friend Mike Grace, who is going to play referee and moderator for our call, because I just didn't think with this particular group and the animosity that you guys all share for one another that I'm kidding. There's no animosity. But in this conversation, I thought it would be super cool to have somebody moderate for us and hopefully guide us through a conversation about a really cool topic. So Mike Grace has joined us from La Mesa, and will be kind of the moderator extraordinaire for our process. So everybody, welcome to the TFL Podcast Special Edition, The Last Dance.
Thank you, Steve. And obviously, I'm here to make sure that you can talk as much as possible and not have to pay attention to the clock and things like that.
That's why I started a podcast, so I could keep talking.
I think we got to see a really unique behind-the-scenes look at a very guarded athlete, especially in the final year of his career, a championship season. I'm curious what many of you found as maybe the most surprising or most memorable part of a 10-hour, 10-part series. Patrick, maybe we can start with you. What did you find maybe most surprising or most memorable about The Last Dance?
I guess surprising would be just kind of how the people around Michael, like who he was close with and who he wasn't, and how his teammates perceived him throughout the course of time. And then, I found the whole documentary really compelling and interesting in a lot of ways. But for me, I think the most interesting part was just how smart he was in terms of managing himself, and the evolution of kind of himself as an athlete, but also the evolution of his brand. I thought was really interesting, and I was a big fan back in the day of Michael, but I didn't know I didn't remember a lot of that. So I thought that all of that stuff combined was pretty cool. I found when they dug deeper into like his teammates and their stories, I found that I think just as interesting or even more interesting. I actually wish they would have spent a little bit more time on them.
Zach, what about you? What did you see that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, what was surprising to me, and also maybe one of my favorite parts, was the ability for him and other guys as well, Rodman and them, to be so good at what they do and be able to flip the switch to kind of turn it on at any moment. where he's golfing the day before, the day of games at times. And, Rodman's taken off to go and do WWE. And then they come back and are the best players in the world without even, questioning it. So that ability to turn it on when it needs to be on and find ways to create motivation and even fabricate it at times, and some of that stuff was just really impressive. And I think I've heard stories of it, but obviously I was pretty young when they were going through it. But just that piece of it, smoking cigars and all of that, and still being the, by far and away the greatest player in the world and potentially the history of the sport. Meanwhile, still, spending nights gambling at the casino and then rolling back in the next morning, stuff like that has caught me off guard a little bit. What was fun to hear about.
The smartest thing that he probably did the whole time was he held back his right to edit the final edit. And so no matter what, he was going to look like a rock star, and he was going to come out on top.
He did. There weren't a lot of questions that he didn't have answers to, surprisingly, right?
I think that's a great point. Like, that's one of the things that are trickling out now is like other players, Pippen might not have been happy with the final edit, and a few of the other guys like, hey, that's not exactly how it went down, so hearing some of that and not knowing exactly what's completely truth and what's not is interesting.
When the filmmaker hands you the tablet so you can watch what Isaiah Thomas says, and you can respond to what other people said about you, there's a bit of a slant on this whole thing that, I thought it was compelling, but certainly there's a slant.
Well, Horace Grant was pretty upset. I'm not sure if anyone saw his comments recently, but he's pretty upset by. And then I actually heard another interview from Sam Smith, the guy that wrote that book on him, and those days and those teams, or that team, that season. Said, yeah, it's the documentary was great, but it was kind of a story based on a true story. So I found that interesting as well, that comment. But Horace Grant, I think, is calling him out. I think he wants to address it.
Yeah, he mentioned that some of the things that supposedly happened wouldn't have happened with the way he handled different things. Kyle, what about you? What stood out to you?
Well, I mean, I think the boys all hit on a few things that I would have mentioned as well. But the one thing that kind of I kept thinking about throughout the whole thing is what would that have looked like for Michael if he had different teammates or maybe a couple different personalities in that group. Obviously, Rodman was a wild card and Michael kind of did what he did as well. But either he had really good teammates or they all just kind of did their own thing and came together when it counted. So I kind of kept looking at that like, there's Michael's having 6 cigars a day, going golfing. Dennis Rodman's out going to Vegas. Scotty's just going with the flow, being quiet. Just kind of the makeup of that team, and for them all to come together and be able to turn it on. I don't know that I've seen many teams in history like that, be able to just kind of flip a switch or, maybe take each other for what they are. Usually they'd have something to say or whatever. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, well, what does that look like with one other guy different? Or Steve Kerr is not able to push Michael in practice and take a sucker punch. What does that whole dynamic look like? Does it make it better? I don't know. So I kind of kept thinking about that in teams I played on as we went through. So I thought that was pretty surprising.
And Cam, you're obviously one of the younger guys in the group, so you probably had a different perspective watching this as a younger kid when Michael was in his heyday. What did you take away from this that maybe you didn't see because you were young?
Yeah, it was an incredible documentary. I was addicted from the first episode. I thought it was really cool to see. First off, I didn't know that Michael Jordan's dad was murdered. So for me, I learned that. And then to see how he kind of grasped onto his security guard, Gus, and kind of treated him like a father figure, and then also showed some compassion. And once they won, I forget what championship it was, but he grabbed the game ball and gave it to Gus. And you kind of saw a little different side of him, because up until that point, they had portrayed him as pushing his teammates and chirping guys and trash talking people. And to show that side of him, I thought was pretty cool. The other thing that really surprised me was Coach Jackson, and how he took the guys that were on his team and he coached them for the people that they were, not necessarily the way he wanted them to be. And you saw that when I think Rodman just left after a game. He jumps on a plane, he goes to Vegas, he comes back, or he went to Phil Jackson and says, hey, I need a vacation. I got to go to Vegas. And his response is okay. He recognizes what his guys needed to be at their peak performance, and gave them the ability to succeed based on what they requested. So I thought that was really cool, how they kind of interacted with their head coach.
And Brody, obviously Michael was, the transformative athlete when you and I were in our formative years. What did you take away from this, and what do you remember being impressionable when he was at the top?
Yeah, I would say that it was funny kind of looking back on some of the teams that he was playing against at different times. And I was always, in hindsight,
a big Clyde Drexler fan.
Yeah, I was a Clyde Drexler fan. I always kind of cheered against Michael, and not because I hated, I didn't, he was almost a little bit boring to me at the time. He had this kind of perfect image, and Patrick was a Jordan fan, so I always found myself either cheering for the Pistons or I became a Blazers fan, and even Utah. I remember, it almost got boring to me, him winning all the time, but now just seeing behind the curtain, seeing the edge that he had, and all that went into winning. Just unbelievable how hard that is to do, and how he was able to pull that off. And I also really appreciated all the role guys, and I think they all seemed to kind of fit together, and so it was a pretty amazing thing to see how it all aligned. So I ended up kind of liking Mike and appreciating him a little bit, and seeing him in a much different light than I remember viewing him growing up.
I'd like to be bored like that. I would love to be boring like that.
Just keep winning rings.
Well, you remember that time, man. He was on Oprah. He was, he always had that. He always came off really well in interviews. You always kind of heard rumblings of the gambling and that kind of stuff. But he was so charismatic, and but this was just, seeing. He was just much different than I thought he was.
How much do you look at Jerry Krause? And look, one of the things that struck me in the whole thing was he put people around him. You talk about teammates, right? And Bucky, you talked about that with teammates. How many guys he put around them that were somewhat interchangeable that played a role, right? Paxton plays the role. Kerr plays the role. Right, Kukoc comes in, plays the role. Longley was playing it before that. It was these are role guys, but I think we all know in the history of our winning, and for those of us that have spent some time in this league and other situations where you win, the role guys put you over the top. And the Gary Gates of the world, God bless him, and was a superstar, and we could never have won without him. But without Dallas Elliott, without in my context of my situation, and Zach, you can talk about Saskatchewan and that situation where winning became boring for them. But the construct of Jerry Krause as the GM, who ultimately is an asshole and is portrayed like an asshole, and probably looks bad in the whole context of the thing. But at the end of the day, GM's got to get some credit for putting a bunch of role players around the superstars.
I think also to that point about role players, I think they were perfect fits on the floor, but I also think to Bucky's point, they also had personalities that meshed well with Michael. Michael was a bit of a bully, and I found
Brody.
he surrounded he surrounded him with guys that he knew he could kind of work with on and off the floor, and I think Scotty was a perfect number 2 because maybe he was a bit scared of Michael, but he was okay in that role. He's more comfortable in that role than he was as a number 1 guy. But 100%, I think Krause deserves a lot of credit, because also they would lose role guys and then they would replace them with guys that were the same or better, which was really tough to do, and I think sustained their run.
Well, you saw Pippen at the end, right? I think it was the last episode, acknowledge that, right? And for the guy who arguably hated Krause the most or demonstrated that throughout the documentary, to come out and say hey, man, Jerry deserves a ton of credit here. I think that spoke volumes about, everybody knew it. They might not have liked the guy, but played a critical factor in them winning, 6 championships.
But he still can't be recognized as a great GM just because of how he finished it, though. I mean, I think you can recognize that he, you know, like, again, I think you respect what he did, but I think it got tainted, right? And you know, without Michael, what happened?
Yeah, I also think the coaching change, though, is a good example of how smart he was, right? So I can't even remember the coach's name prior to Phil, but the time where they were starting to kind of, you know, get close, you know, they were still a pretty good team, and then they decided to make that change, and Phil was the right guy at the right time. So I think that's a pretty smart move as well. And also, you know, I think he saw the end coming. I think Krause saw the end coming, and he was trying to get ahead of it. So, you know, but then obviously Phil wasn't agreeable to that, or I guess Phil wasn't a part of that. And Michael wasn't agreeable to it, and obviously Scotty wasn't, so it kind of blew up his plan. But I still think he had another plan to extend that run.
Well, Patty, the beauty of Hollywood, we'll never know the backstories on a lot of the reasons why it actually shut down. You know, where Jerry Reinsdorf was as an owner, you know, and the concept. And he comments at the end of the last episode talking about, well, we couldn't have kept them. We couldn't afford to keep them all. And then, you know, in retrospect, right, in an epilogue to the whole thing, they kind of sit back and go, well, maybe everybody would have signed a 1-year deal and come back and played. I don't know if Scottie Pippen was really interested in the last part of his career is signing another deal that might have, you know, whether it kept them together to win or not. Like, let's face it, playing in the NBA, you got to get paid. That's your job. I mean, you only have a certain amount of time to get, you know, to craft your livelihood.
I don't know, though, to get 7 championships, and my biggest gripe with that is he told them at the beginning of the season. So to me, it was pretty remarkable that they stuck it out, and they went and won that championship, hating the fact that their GM was knowingly going to tear them apart. I don't know. I can't speak on this, but like if I have the opportunity to compete for a 7th championship, I'll take a pay cut any day of the week to stick with that group and have that core ride that out, especially knowing that it's never been done and, you know, probably won't be in the capacity they did for a while.
The essence of the NLL versus the NBA.
No, I was going to say maybe Krause is the real genius, and he actually came out at the beginning of the year to create that motivation for them because he didn't think they were going to get it done otherwise, and you know they needed a villain, and he became it. But that'd be next level stuff if that was actually the case.
Well, I mean, I do believe maybe it had a lot to do with the fact that he only thought they had one last year in them, and you know, he was trying to motivate them, piss them off.
Let me be the first to say, Patrick, you're out of a job at the end of next year if you don't win.
All right.
All right.
Cali BBQ is proud to be an official sponsor of your San Diego Seals. Buy our slow smoked barbecue at any Seals home game or online anytime at www.calibbq.media.
Let's shift gears a little bit. And
I'm kidding. It was a joke.
And everyone's getting traded.
I'm protecting you as much as I can, Patty. I think Michael, for the most part, is probably known for his competitiveness. And I don't think many people would argue a more competitive guy in the world of sports. I'd love to kind of hear each one of your experiences of who you played with or possibly against that you found the most competitive, whether it was will to win or hated to lose. And I think we should start with Steve on this one, and then maybe we can go chronologically because you can start having overlap with the players that maybe you played with. So, you know, Steve to Patty to Brody and then down the line.
Yeah, I mean, 2 comments. One about a player that wasn't in the National Basketball Association and not in the NLL, but like when you look at Wayne Gretzky's career and a guy that won a ton, you could probably argue that Wayne did it in a much different way. And maybe that's because we're all Canadian, that we see it from the perspective of he probably said sorry a lot and he probably said thank you a lot in the process, whereas Michael had a different approach and probably came from a different background and culture in the sports. I do think that I had the great opportunity to play with obviously I put Gary Gait up at the highest level of the game and watched John Grant as a general manager. And I know you guys have all had the opportunity to play with Junior at sometimes in your career, but look, Gary Gait was a fiery competitor. The comparison of Gary Gait to Michael Jordan, in my opinion, was their ability to have the memory of a gnat. Like literally, they forgot very quickly about a failure and moved on to a success and replicated that success over and over again. When Michael was, struggling I think in game 6 and was hitting shot after shot on the front of the rim, because he was short, he stowed that pretty quickly and mustered up the ability to hit a great shot at the end. Ultimately, that's the one thing that I always admired about Gary is he had a very short memory. So I'll stop at that and let you guys kind of go from there.
Patrick, who kind of stands out to you on that competitive scale?
There's a few guys. I was lucky enough to play on the Rock when they were kind of in the middle of a dynasty when I got drafted there, and so there were so many different. It kind of actually reminded me a little bit about of that Bulls team in some ways, all the different kind of characters and all the different type of roles guys played to make the team successful and become championship teams. But really the first guy that kind of came to my mind was Colin Doyle. He was kind of that guy that in terms of competitiveness, him and probably Shooter are probably the two most competitive guys I've ever played with. And that wasn't just on the floor during games. That was, there were fights in practice. There were, there were fights during card games at the back of the bus, if they lost and things like that. It actually brought back a lot of cool memories, watching, how they interacted with each other, in the NBA locker rooms back in those days. I mean, Lacrosse was like that, but like way, guys were, smoking cigarettes between periods and things like that back in the day. But I think in terms of pure competitiveness, Josh Sanderson and Colin Doyle were at the top of the list for me. And when the chips were down, they just had that presence about them, kind of similar to the way Steve was talking about Gary Gait, where they just have this confidence in the moment, right? Where they wanted the ball in their stick and it just didn't really matter how. They were just going to get it done, and they always did, especially in those dramatic moments.
How about you, Brody?
More recently, a guy that I've kind of been on the wrong side of just some playoff runs in the NLL is Cody Jamieson. He just kind of has that fire, that kind of it factor, and had a chance to play with him one summer in Six Nations, and we were down 3-0 in a series. And he hadn't played; he had torn his ACL, and he ended up coming back. I remember showing up to the locker room, and I had just got there. It was the team had already been out at warm up, and he's in there fidgeting around with a knee brace. I'm like, "What are you doing, man?" And he's like, "I'm going tonight." And we ended up coming back from 3-0 deficit and went on to win a Mann Cup. It was the best. Probably Mann Cup's a little bit under the radar, but it was one of the best kind of individual performances, and just kind of seeing again that fire, that competitive, that win at all costs, that kind of alpha type of mindset, and definitely, and that and that clutch, and again I think back to some times where it's just like, man, in those big moments he would come through a lot. So he was the first person that came to mind.
How about you, Zach? Who stands out in your career?
Yeah, I think from a competitive standpoint on the floor in the lacrosse space, I'll tip my cap to the two brothers on this call. And I learned from a young age playing against them primarily that there's no friends when you're on the floor, and that's part of, I think, what has helped me flip the switch a little bit when you get out there is, lacrosse is a small community, and at some point or another you've played with or know somebody who's played with, and nobody's making millions of dollars, right? So it is a pretty friendly sport for the most part when you get to the professional level. And I had some, experience playing in the MLL before I started playing in the NLL, which I think, as we know, is a little bit different from a competitive level standpoint as well. But, just in playing against these guys, whether it be at the NLL level or, even Canadian national team tryouts and stuff like that, like you get on the floor and it doesn't matter who's on the other side, how long you've known them, whatever it is, you're going to do whatever it is, you got to do to win the game and play your role and help your team be successful. So I took a lot from them at a young age, and learning to try to block that out, block everything else out, and focus on what I need to do to make my team successful, help us win. I think these two guys are two of the guys, maybe the best to ever do that. And it's actually really fun to watch when you're on the same side, because of that. Doesn't matter who it is over there, longtime friends, and see these guys kind of go after them and support their teammates and everything that goes along with it. So I'll give the nod to these two.
What do you got, Kyle?
Yeah. I think when I'm looking at competitive, I have to go to one guy I've won a couple with, and actually been on the other end of it as well, as Shawn Evans. I think he, honestly, looking at that documentary, there's some few things that kind of reminded me of Evie, and he's honestly a prick sometimes to a lot of guys, and I'm not sure if it's to pull the best out of them, but it often does. Just kind of how he approaches the game, and when the game's on the line, he wants the ball on his stick and wants to make a play and do that kind of thing. And I remember early in my career in junior in the Minto Cup, he sold a call late in the game, and he'd do anything to win, whether that was diving, whether that was cheap shotting the guy, whether that was scoring the goal. It didn't really matter, but if he won, that's all that really mattered. So when I'm looking at competitiveness, he's one I think of, similar to what I forget who it was saying it earlier, maybe you, Patty. There's a lot of card games on the bus where I thought maybe he had, aces up his sleeves and things like that. So he didn't give a shit what it was, but he wanted to win and still does to this day. So I've been lucky to be on the right side of that a few times and learned a lot from that. So he's someone who reminded me of that same competitiveness.
Cam?
Yeah, for me, Steve kind of touched on one person, but John Grant Jr., from a competitive standpoint, that guy reminded me so much like Michael Jordan. He wants the ball in his stick. If there's one more shot to be had, Junior wants that shot. So he's kind of the one guy that came to mind. And then I think as this one gets older, Austin Stotts, that guy wears his heart on his sleeve and is one of the most competitive people person that I've ever played with. And we've only been around him for 2 years, but as he continues to get older, he's gonna be that guy everybody knows about. And from a competitive standpoint, he's going to accomplish so much more over his career.
I was actually going to ask that question to the rest of the guys. If they thought they saw in 83 the early stages of Last Dance, right, was the discussion, right? I think in the context of the whole 10 episodes, right, 10 hours, you saw the maturation of a player from the time he graduates college to where he became after the 6th championship. And then ultimately when he gets interviewed 20 years later, do you guys see Austin Stotts as that young kid that came to the Bulls in the first stage? So Cam, I wanted to ask that question of you and then the other guys.
Yeah, the day that I knew that was accurate was our first win at home, and he grabs his jersey, and there's a great picture of him flashing our logo to the fans, and you could just see the emotion on his face. And I think that's contagious, and that the rest of the team rallies and builds on that. And I think you're exactly right that as he gets older, that's just going to continue to get better. And I watched the first episode, and I went and texted him immediately, and I made sure to remind him that, like, this is going to be you, and you're kind of on that path, and keep going, because it's a special kind of talent.
Patrick, you've known him since he was very young. What have you seen in him, and where he was when you started with him and where he is now on that competitive level?
I completely agree with what's been said. I think Cam and I were texting about this the other night when we were talking about this, watching the documentary, and he was definitely one of the first people I thought of too. I think he's a bit of a throwback, to be honest. I think he's all those things that you describe, and he's just, all great players kind of, and I hope he doesn't watch this, but all great players, all great players have, it's hard to put your finger on it. It's kind of that it factor, and it's called that it factor for a reason. And he's certainly got it. He's got that swagger. And one of the things that I first noticed about him, that I really admired about him, because I never really knew him. I knew his older brother a bit from his time at the Hill when he was younger, and I heard a lot about Austin before the first time I actually stepped on the floor with him. But right away, I just was drawn to him because it didn't really matter. It was the first day of training camp. There were a lot of guys that were like veteran players that were missing. He was clearly the best player on the floor. But he literally, it wasn't enough for him. Like, there were some rookies there trying out for the team that had no chance to make it. And he literally wanted to prove to every single person on that floor that not only was he the best player out there, but he was going to embarrass you in the process. And it was every drill, like every single moment that he was on that floor, he gave it everything that he had in a competitive way. And I think that there's a reason why, championships follow guys like that around. And so he's certainly got it. He's got some refining to do, much like Michael Jordan, had to go through during the early years of his career. But definitely his name comes to mind when you watch that documentary.
Well, the parallel's a little eerie. He's drafted as high as he was. He gets hurt, kind of early in his career, and then the anticipation of him coming back after winning Rookie of the Year, and Jordan wins Rookie of the Year. Like, it's a little, I hadn't thought of it before this conversation, but it's a little eerie.
The one thing I think about Audie when I'm looking at that too is just like, you picture someone in his position and you're like, as older guys in the team, we're like, oh, how do you make this guy a leader? And the best part about it is that you don't got to change him. Like, he is who he is. Michael is who he is. He doesn't give a shit who you are or what you do. He wants to win. And that's the end of it. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're on his team, he wants to win, and he's going to push you. He's going to push you in practice. He's going to push you in shoot around. It doesn't matter. He'll shoot a diving goal and shoot around. Like, it's just that level of intensity is just brought to a whole nother height. And that's what's, I think, super parallel to MJ. And, he just leads in his own way, completely different than anybody else.
I think to that point is, I think in a leader, a lot of guys have different ways to project this, but, is that authenticity, right? That comfort in his own skin. I think the big fellow on this call has that as well, just in a different form, where it comes out, where it's that, he's not trying to be someone that he isn't, to your point, right? He's going to show up and give it everything that he has no matter what. And he doesn't try to be a different type of leader or a different type of player or like somebody else. He just tries to be the best version of himself. And I think that's a really important quality in a leader.
Brody, you captained Austin in his rookie year. What did you see right away, and what have you seen in the growth so far?
He sets a temperature when he steps in the locker room. And I just, I agree with everything that's been said. I think he just has this energy about him, and is competitive. Like, people talk about competitiveness, and I think that it doesn't matter. Like, Bucky brought up shoot around, and just watching him on the floor and watching him shoot and watching him go through drills. It's there's a fire, in him, and he's just I find him, injecting energy and life just being around him. And I think I've really fed off of him as an older guy, and just love and appreciate being around him. And you can just see that. I'm sure you guys know, felt it in Vegas with his first game back. We weren't sure whether or not he's going to play. And then, man, he was so excited, and there was no way we were losing that game that night, man, just because and he was a catalyst to that. And I think he's destined for some great things. So I'm excited.
We certainly can't let him watch this. And Mike, we may have to edit out the entire segment. Anyway.
Not only the goals you just set for the kid,
The thing is, he knows it. He knows it, right? And I think that's what's cool about him is that he knows it. And he's he's authentic.
I want to ask a quick question, and I thought there was a glaring omission in the whole Last Dance documentary, and I know every one of you guys is very family is super important to all you guys, and your wives are a huge part of your life, and they whether they're dictating what your thought process is or telling you what to think, or whether they're simply the standard by which you measure yourself as a human being, and they're the better part of all of us. I know you guys, I know your wives pretty well, but ultimately, did it seem like a glaring omission in that entire documentary that there was only one mention in 10 hours of his wife? And I, to me, if they did a documentary about my career, whether it was good or bad, regardless, there had to be some mention of the woman that was kind of standing behind me, pushing me to be, the person that I was throughout the process. Was that an omission to you guys that seemed odd?
It's funny you say that, because as soon as that documentary ended, I just set up, I was like, wow, that was amazing. And the first thing my wife said to me was, they didn't say anything about his family. And I was like, that's not the point.
Well, they showed his kids, but they didn't show his wife. There's one mention.
Not his
kids.
Gus, they didn't show anything.
Say, do you want to call your wife?
Right. Yeah. The more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, you know what? I guess they didn't. They didn't show a ton of his kids or the behind the scenes family life. So definitely something interesting.
It's almost like he didn't have a home, that he was only in hotels and living on the road, right? It was
yeah.
And then you see his kids in the last episode, and you actually see a pretty cool glimpse, I think, into that, right? They're like, I had to Google who my dad was and this and that, and there were kind of some cool things come out about him that are like, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about what that looked like at home, and how he was able, I think, again, to turn it on and off and separate those things. But it is strange, and I wonder if that's an omission by MJ or whoever had some say in that. It makes you think, but I thought about that myself.
I think you gotta expect that somebody on that level who is that committed and that focused on a singular goal has a much different relationship with their wife and family than maybe we do. Is making that much money, is traveling the world as the most famous person in the world at the time. You look at the Tiger Woods stuff, right? These guys are very different, and their mind is in a different place a lot of the time. So I would expect that there might be a reason why the wife wasn't involved as much as maybe she would have been in some of our storytelling. But yeah.
But it struck you, right? Did it strike you? Is that something you thought about?
I didn't actually. I was surprised a little bit that the mom was in there and his kids weren't until the last episode. But I didn't. I don't know. I didn't really expect it. It was a story about him and his teammates and the competitiveness and I don't know. I was not caught off guard by that. But again, I would go back to my expectation for him would be that he lives a drastically different life than a normal human. So,
but
things
Zach,
like that.
In the context of the fact that his father was such a massive influence, right? That there was a family member that was a massive influence, and someone probably that crafted the narrative of his competitiveness. It just struck me as odd that there was no portrayal of a partner, that I think for you guys as players in the context, we're all, we have partners in the process. And I know every one of you they have been part of your decision-making process to play for the Seals, to continue to play lacrosse, to be a part of that. And you don't make that decision without them, regardless of money.
Yeah, I kind of remember her being pretty, present throughout his career, and you notice that in that relationship. And I'm sure it all had to kind of align for him, to be able to have the career that he did, with his family life. But there's also a cost to it too. I'm sure that when, we'll never know. But I think he's always been pretty guarded, and I think rightfully so, of kind of opening up that side of things. And but yeah, I agree. I was intrigued to know more, about his family life during that time, and how it all fit in. But considering all our own personal situations and how much that goes into it. So yeah, it's a good point.
I mean, really, the only reason I brought it up is because if my wife watches this, I wanted to make sure that I brought it up so I get for it. So,
and I think
we got to edit that out too.
Well, I think that's the thing Michael has that nobody else in this room has, is an ex-wife. And so you never know how that situation's going to play out, and how much she wanted to participate, or how much he wanted her to participate to tell some of those stories. So,
doesn't he have an ex-wife?
Yeah, his longtime wife, when he played, they are divorced.
Yeah.
He's remarried. So, yeah. Like you said, Steve, when you have creative control and control over the edit, that might not be the person you want featured in your special documentary. So
there you go. How about his bloodshot eyes? I mean, come on. Does he have a kidney problem, or what's going on with that?
He's got glaucoma.
Come on.
He won't talk about it.
He didn't want to talk about it.
I always saw him as like this like kind of beacon of health and everything, and throughout his career, and now he's got the big whiskey. Like, how big was that whiskey? And you can see the levels kind of going up and down.
I have no problem with that.
I just saw him in a different light, for sure.
A quick break. This episode is sponsored by Manscaped.com. Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene. If you've been listening to our channel for a while, you know that we are big fans of Manscaped and their Perfect Package Essentials Kit, which is the world's finest all-in-one manscaping kit that makes manscaping safe and easy. And just when you think they've got it all figured out, they take it to the next level. I'm excited to be one of the first to confirm that after 18-plus months of research and development, the new Lawnmower 3.0 waterproof body trimmer has just been released and comes with a ton of new upgrades. Get 20% off plus free shipping from your Perfect Package 3.0 purchase when you use promo code SEALS20 at manscaped.com. That's code SEALS20 for 20% off at manscaped.com. Now, back to the pod. I kind of want to touch on something that Steve said and Bucky said. And, Bucky said that Shawn Evans was a bit of an asshole. And I think one of the words everybody heard a lot throughout this series was a trigger word, and bully, and that Michael had to bully his teammates, in his words, to push them to the level to be that great. Now, they had success that almost nobody in the modern era of sports has had, outside of possibly Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton run and then so on. But did it take that level of bully, asshole? He didn't care. He didn't need his teammates to be his friend. He literally said he had to sacrifice that part of his life because winning was that important. Do you think he's the outlier, and that's why he had that amount of success, because he was willing to push his teammates that hard and not be their friend? And has that made you even consider how you might lead or be a teammate to achieve that type of success?
Well, hey, I'll start, but basketball is a different sport, obviously, than lacrosse or hockey from a team perspective, or even football. Like, he had the ability to influence the outcome of games almost single-handedly. When he was literally playing 45 of 48 minutes, he was on every play. For offensive guys like Bucky or Zach to have influence over a National Lacrosse League game of that magnitude at that amount of time, it's almost physically impossible. So you could stand to bully opponents, and you could stand to bully your teammates, because part of that bullying process is you had the ball. And I get partly he was a bully, but ultimately he also knew when to hit the release button, right? When to hit Kerr for the shot because he was getting double teamed, and so preparing guys for their own success, I thought was another compelling point of the story.
Yeah, I think it's a weird dynamic. Like if you're looking at his schedule and how much he's seeing his teammates, I thought it was an interesting approach because that's got to be a natural thing for him, right? Like that's clearly who he is as a person at all times, right? We're with our teammates, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, let's just call it. And during those times, we have some gaps in between when we see each other. And for us to be like that, it would have to be natural, but it'd be certainly different because you wouldn't see your guys throughout the week. So for him, that just came off through his competitiveness. All he cared about was one thing. And whether, again, that was cards, that was golf, that was whatever, that was just who he was. I don't think you can change to be like that. I think that's who you are. So I don't know if you can even pull a little bit of that out because like you guys were talking about earlier, it's not authentic and that's not who you are and that's not a leader. So in that respect, you're not going to get anything out of your teammates, which leads to then being a 6-time NBA champion. So I'm not sure, again, I'm kind of talking in circles there, but I'm not sure that lines up to pull anything out of that in order to be a leader like that.
And I think something Steve said that was interesting was that you got a room full of Canadians, and the small amount of time I've been around Canadians, it's hard to imagine, any of you guys treating people that way. And I think, plug your ears, Brody, but, we've talked about Brody's leadership abilities and legendary capabilities in that sense. And I could never imagine somebody like Brody kind of treating people that way. Obviously it's hard to argue this with his success, and it is apples to oranges, league to league, but it's just so interesting to see that type of leadership style.
I think it varies by the person, and it's different leadership styles too, I guess. And so for instance, like this year, Brody was living down here, and I'll use his leadership as verbal and nonverbal, very much a nonverbal leader. I was out there training with him, and he wasn't bullying by any means. And I was like, all right, workout's done. And he just steps up. He goes, no, it's not. We got footwork. And so then I was like, all right, shit, I guess I got to go run. And I thought I was already cash. And then we did footwork for 15 minutes. And then I went and sat down, started drinking water, get ready to leave. And then he starts setting up another damn drill. And I'm like, oh, shit. So, like, that's a kind of leader where he was bringing the most out of me because we share that level of competition. And he was like, hey, buddy, like, we're not done. Like, we got more to do. So, like I said, I think there's different ways you can kind of get that out of people. And that's how Jordan ultimately tried to do it. But
sometimes leadership, sometimes he's just trying to be funny. You know what I mean? He's not trying to lead in some cases. Like, you talk John Grant Jr. and Cam earlier, like Junior wasn't necessarily a leader per se. He was a great player, and he did things on the floor that would exude leadership because he was trying to win. But ultimately, off the floor, when he threw a toxic chirp, you know what? He was just simply trying to be a funny guy. And some of what was portrayed by Jordan was, you know what? Maybe he was just lightening it up a bit. Not everything can be read into, wow, you're a massive leader. Sometimes there's just a lapse in judgment. You're trying to be funny, and it sometimes backfires. I have that problem myself.
I think you're spot on with saying that about Junior, because I was going to mention that here too. Is like, that's exactly how Junior was, and he would run his mouth to you, and he just had a level of confidence within himself that he could say those things and then back it up. So I think he's a good example too.
Yeah, I mean, culture. Go ahead, Patty.
Go ahead, Zach.
No, I was just going to say, make the culture, piece of it, right? Like, we mentioned the difference between hockey and lacrosse, but like basketball is a much different culture, come from a much different place. A lot of times different upbringing, different demographics, all of that stuff. And so I think that might, play a little bit of it as well. You see that in football a lot, right? Like, particularly down here, whether it's the wide receivers and the DBs, going at it, or, guys fighting with their quarterback and stuff. It's just the kind of a different structure and a different culture that they live in. And that's the way the sport is played from, youth through high school up into the next level. So I think that might impact it. And then the other thing I was going to say was what Steve mentioned is his ability to control a game. In that sense, it almost is a lot closer to an individual sport where, he knows that the people around him are a piece of the puzzle. And you make the comparison to Tiger Woods, right? You got to have a caddy and you got to have a trainer and all of this stuff. And Tiger, treated people the same way for a lot of his careers, as far as I can tell. But ultimately, Michael's in control. And the other thing that he said that I thought was interesting at the end was he never asked anybody to do something that he wasn't going to do himself. And so when you are going to carry yourself that way, you are going to put in the extra work and go above and beyond, then, he felt like he had the ability to push guys more and in different ways than somebody else would if they weren't putting in the same time and energy that he was.
See, did you guys find it interesting? And this is for those people out there that are watching this and don't spend much time in a locker room or in an NLL locker room. Did you guys find? I thought it was really intriguing how he's sitting there giving out tickets to games. I thought that was like really interesting how he was kind of the banker, if you will, on who got tickets and who didn't.
I thought he was hanging in that one room with like Ahmad Rashad and like his security, and the one that was like two hours before Game 7. Where I thought that was fun. But I mean, I think it's like he's so unique that it's hard to compare, right? Like you see little snapshots of it. Yeah, I'm sure everybody has of different people throughout their career with it, but it's tough to compare anybody to him that way.
Brody, you throughout your career, I'm sure you've come across every different type of player. As a leader, have you ever felt the need to, I'm not going to say bully, but maybe have an intimidating presence to push somebody? Maybe you see greatness in somebody and they're not at that point in their career willing to sacrifice or work hard enough to be that good. Like, have you had to really kind of take it to another level to push a player to be what you think they could be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you got to be yourself with it. Like I don't think I quite had it, like in the same way. But it's you're just trying to I think Patrick had said it. Like leadership has a price to it too, right? And sometimes you have to, the team comes first and the team standards come first, right? So sometimes it could come in the form of like most times it's conversations like during the in-between times, and then sometimes it can come through like just spur of the moment and more like during a practice or in the heat of the moment of a game. But I think that's just it, is just trying to stay true to who you are and try to uphold the standard of the team and what you're trying to accomplish.
Not that this has anything to do with basketball, but in the context of Brody, and leadership and influence, I kept talking about the TFL podcast, and the joke was, I'm going to do the TFL. I'm going to do this TFL thing. And Brody goes, he just kind of offhandedly one day said to me, and Brody, I don't know if you remember this, but he just kind of said, and this is when you were living here, but turned around and said, you keep talking about it. When are you going to do it? And I kind of went, okay, I guess I got, so it wasn't so much leadership, and it was an influential comment that was kind of like, wasn't meant as a dig. It wasn't meant as anything else. It was just merely something that made me think and spurred me to kind of do something that I might not have otherwise done.
And that's a great thing about being in lacrosse. Like you think of it on our team, and even this, we actually talked about it as a team earlier this year, just different moments, and you're feeding off different leadership styles within the room, right? Where everybody has those little, it's a good feeling, when you have somebody in your corner that can be honest with you and you have that relationship with. I think that's a cool thing.
I think also for Michael, it was obviously basketball and the basketball court in the locker room was his sanctuary, right? Where, I think he did. I think it's a combination of things. I think he did understand the cost or price that he needed to pay to take that next step and be a winner. And I think he realized that through the tough losses that he had earlier in his career. I do think he understood the cost of what it takes to kind of be a leader, and not asking guys to do things that you weren't willing to do and all that type of stuff. But I also think that, I think that's what he enjoyed the most about it. I think he loved interacting with his teammates that way. I think it got him to a certain level as well in terms of motivating him to be the best that he could be and getting up for every game and that sort of thing. And I think he also just liked the banter. Like I watched those episodes. I was a couple of days after they were released, and I was on Twitter and guys were saying, "Oh man, he's a bully, he's this and that." And I was like, honestly, I was expecting a lot worse when I actually watched the episode. I was like, what are you talking about? That's bullying. That's bullying, like that, walk in any NLL locker room at any given time. Yeah, they're just having a good time, right? They're in their comfort zone.
Another quick break. Coronado Brewing Company is proud to be the official craft beer partner of the Seals. Enjoy fan favorite Orange Avenue Wit and their new Salty Crew Blonde Ale all season long, and visit coronadobrewing.com to find their award-winning beers near you. Stay coastal. Cheers.
I have a quick question. So, Kyle, the media attention that Michael Jordan was getting everywhere he went, it's kind of like when Zack Greer walks out of a locker room, right? And everybody's all over him. Good-looking guy. Everybody wants to be Zack Greer, right? It's kind of like that, right?
It's identical. I try at the same time so I can scoot by him, and they always want a piece of 88. I know that.
Kind of always
I know what locker room you're talking about.
Is that what he calls him? He's a man rocket. God, he's got a crush on him.
Good stuff. I think one of the people that came through really well on this series was Phil Jackson, and everybody in this room coaches or has coached on some level, I think, and he's probably one of the more unique coaches in sport in the way that he handled players and personalities and the way he motivated. Curious what you maybe took away from that. And Patrick, we'll start with you since you're the highest level head coach right now.
Well, I think, obviously, he was perfect for that group. I think Cam was mentioning it earlier where he really understood all of his kind of key guys and all the individual personalities on his team, and he was able to kind of push the right buttons accordingly. And I also think that it was obviously clear that Michael was the alpha in the room, in the arena, and that he didn't need to be, so he could be kind of more of a softer touch. But I actually really enjoyed learning kind of how he taught Michael to use his teammates and use the other role players around him. I found that really intriguing and interesting. The triangle offense and his assistant coach Tex and all that stuff. I found that really cool. I also found it really cool because I'm sure it wasn't being done by anyone else during that time where, he was using his Zen kind of mindfulness tactics or whatever you want to call them or practices. And I found like it was a really good centering point for all the guys. But I think more than anything, he was relatable to all the different type of personalities, right? From Michael all the way down the roster. And that's not easy to do. I think he was a genius in that way.
So in the context of the greatness of Phil Jackson, he goes on, he's the only guy in the cast of characters from that show that goes on to replicate that success with the same level of ego with guys like Kobe and Shaq, right? And a number of role players in that world. But none of those other guys, and again, they age out and they get older as pro athletes, but never with the level of success after that era. Phil Jackson replicates it, so his greatness is kind of memorialized in doing this at a lot of levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think he also tried to find a team in the Lakers thereafter that he could, that was a good fit for him. I think part of his reluctance to go back to Chicago again for one more year, even though he was offered the opportunity, obviously pride is one thing because he was basically fired before that season even started, and he knew it. But I think it was also he didn't want to be a part of a rebuild. I don't think he was confident. I don't think that was the type of team that he wanted to coach. I think he wanted to find another veteran group that he could that he could manage the way he knew how. I think that was an important part of it. But I also think he found the right situation for him that next phase of his career.
I like what he came from, right? He didn't show up with a massive pedigree. Forget his coaching specifics, but right, smaller schools, and started as the assistant coach before getting bumped up. So it wasn't like he came from winning multiple national championships or NBA titles elsewhere. He really did it from the ground up. And so to be able to go from where he started to turning into what he turned into is just as impressive as him being able to continue it on later. But I really like his story of progression and how he kind of found his way alongside that team, and putting the pieces together, like you said, was pretty impressive to me.
Started coaching in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
CBA.
You gotta really love coaching.
Yeah.
I like the fact that he wasn't like he was very comfortable in his own skin. He was like kind of a lighthouse for them. And he wasn't. I don't think he sweated like in a conventional coaching way. He didn't sweat some of the small things, or even like it's watching it with Rodman in the playoffs there, where he missed shoot around. He's the WWE, and it was like I think he had a maybe a broader perspective on it that he maybe didn't get in his own way.
By the way, highly recommend you guys watch the Rodman documentary on Netflix. In comparison, you want to talk about where people come from and the culture that they fit. It's a fascinating story that is a massive departure from The Last Dance.
Well, I think one thing that came out of this, Jordan wanted to squash the GOAT talk in basketball as LeBron has really ascended in his career. So I think that was some of the impetus behind this documentary. I really want to hear each of your takes on the NLL GOAT. There's obviously, it's an opinion, so there's lots of them. But let's talk about it. Who is the greatest NLL player of all time?
I'm the youngest. I'll kick off here. Based on the guys I've played with or played against, there's two names that come to mind. One's been said a bunch, and that's John Grant. And the other is John Tavares. And both of them are just so talented, have played for so long. And if you go to anybody that's currently in the league, and those are two names that everybody can identify with and has either lost against or won with. So those are the two big names for me.
I guess I'll go next. I guess I have to, my first instinct, I was asked recently about that too. And I said John Tavares myself. I think in a couple ways, both summer lacrosse and NLL lacrosse, field lacrosse, whatever, I just thought he was pretty progressive with how he played the game, physicality, finesse, just a bunch of different ways to be successful. That's just someone I looked up to when I was young. So for me, looking at being able to play against him for a couple of years, that would be the go for me.
Yeah, I was going to jump on the Johnny Tavares train as well. If we're talking NLL specifically, I think if you expand it out across the different leagues and different versions of the sport to field lacrosse, I'd probably go with Gary Gait just on his ability, his creativeness. He really did have that influence and impact on the game. You look at a guy like, Bobby Orr, and you say that he changed the way the sport was played. I think you can look at Gator the same way. Some of the things he was doing, obviously the air gate in college and some of that stuff, but he added a level of creativity that just changed the way people think about what was possible on the lacrosse floor.
Yeah, it's his with Tavares, his longevity was really impressive to me. He played into his mid-40s and was so smart. Had played with such an edge. I wish I'd have seen more Gary Gait play. I came in right as he retired, So I didn't get to see as much. I obviously saw more, again, across other versions of the game. And always, I considered him, it's funny because he's always described as a Michael Jordan of lacrosse. So those two stand out. And then you have guys like John Grant and Colin Doyle and Josh Sanderson and Jim Veltman. Those are guys that come to mind for me.
Patty?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of the same as Brody. I didn't actually get to see Gary play a whole lot when I was younger. And when I played against him, it was only for a few years, and it was at the end. But I do think, obviously, just from watching old film, again, it's so hard to pick one guy because there, all the names that you mentioned, I think you can make a case for already. But I like guys that can kind of do it all, and I feel like Gary and Paul were like that. And Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like they were like that, during their prime years where they could do anything. They can beat you in any type of way that you could think of. They were big, they were athletic, they had great sticks, they can beat you in so many different ways. And two players from my generation that I think, kind of fit that bill are Jim Veltman, just the way he thought the game 2 steps ahead of everybody else. I felt like that was very impressive, and as an older guy, when I was playing with him, he still was kind of like Michael, but by example, where he would win all the sprints. He was thinking creatively at practice. He was always just mentally a few steps ahead of everybody, and you could play him on any position on the floor and he was going to find a way to be successful. So you could put him he was on our power play, he was on our short man team, he was on the loose ball team, he could do all those things. And obviously I'm a bit biased here. The other one, I think the only other player that I've seen that can do that many things all in one player is Brody, and he had the toughness element to that too. So where again, that to me, when you think about the best player of all time, I think it's the impact that you make on the game. And a lot of guys can score really well, a lot of guys can defend really well, or pick up loose balls, or beat guys up, or whatever the case may be. But to me, the guys that can do all those things really well are the ones that should be in that category.
Wow. So I'll bring it home, and so many thoughts kind of come to mind in this conversation. And what's really difficult for me is kind of, I've always looked at it like in terms of lacrosse, there was never a greatest. It was more like who's on the Mount Rushmore for lacrosse, and I picked 5 guys to put on the list. Gary and Paul were always, at the top of my list because obviously I played with them and they're Western Canadian guys. I'm the only Western Canadian guy here. So, but that notwithstanding, JT is on that list. Jimmy Veltman, Darius Kilgore, and Dallas Eliak were the guys that I always put up on that list of Mount Rushmore as kind of the 5 runners and a goalie. But really, I thought the NLL did a really interesting thing last week where they created a simulation of a video game and put guys on the cover. And they had Gary Gate as the icon edition, and they had John Tavares as the GOAT edition. So I thought that was an intriguing, interesting play. And they used Junior, I think, the legend. And so it was a really interesting thing. I probably would put Gary on this list, and for one reason, over JT. Longevity, obviously, JT played the game, and he played the game similar to Gretzky, where he didn't get hit. I mean, you could never hit him. He was a ghost. And he was always that type of guy that was in the right place at the right time and finished and did all the things. But he was really good on the offensive end of the floor, obviously the best. And Longevity played and certainly can't be disputed. He's on my podcast tomorrow, so I got to suck up to him. But Gary was on it last week for those of you that want to go back and listen to that one. So shameless plug. But I'll tell you, Gary Gait was an unbelievable defender, and I did say that when I spoke to him last week. The level of his defense was amazing. And so when you talked about domination on the front door and the back door, playing defense, as those of you know, we used to play both ways in this game, and it wasn't as specialized as it is today. Conceptually, Gary played out in the defensive end and was as dominant as a defender as he was in the offensive end. And I don't think that can be said for John Tavares, as much as I believe he's an excellent, unbelievable player. Gary was dominant as a defender as much as he was in the offensive end and in transition and all the rest. So I would only say as the game changed, many of you young guys only got to see them play at one end. I certainly don't even want to talk about junior playing defense. So, I think that probably wouldn't be the case. I think Brody, obviously, if he played more offense, if we could just have him shooting from his own end into the empty net every game, I'd be thrilled with that too. And, we'll take that, the long bounce shot in the top corner. But look, I'm biased. I think Gary is that player just because of what he could do at both ends of the floor. So, hey, it is what it is. I want to thank all you guys for doing this and spending the time. Mike Grace for obviously keeping the game flowing. Great job by you. But fellas, great conversation. Certainly appreciate The Last Dance and having 10 hours of programming for us to got to watch for 5 weeks, and look forward to Sunday nights. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do next week. Maybe we should, Mike, start playing the TFL podcast Sunday nights and people can start paying attention to that. Anyway, I'm kidding. But look, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Any last thoughts? Very compelling content. Thank you so much. I appreciate your contribution there.
This was a lot of fun. We appreciate being on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with the popularity of this podcast. I think you there was The Last Dance, and then there was the Prez cooking show and the TFL podcast. I think we're right there neck and neck in terms of popularity on the internet.
Is going to make a comeback. As you guys know, most of you, I'm in the process of moving, so I'm relocating my kitchen. So TFL Kitchen is getting a rebrand. So, fellas, it's been a pleasure. It's always great to talk to you guys, and especially about something as meaningful as bullying and leadership and all that fun stuff. So thanks again. Appreciate you doing it, and love you guys. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Steve.
See you guys.
Thanks, Steve. That was fun.
guys.
See you, boys.